Alright, it's 2:07. Sorry for the late start, guys. Some technical difficulties. You should be here for Intro to Backbone.js. I'm going to switch this to... So I'm just curious, is there anybody here that's using Backbone.js currently, or is it you guys just out of curiosity checking this out, or using Backbone? Cool. Do you have any like live projects or anything, or experimenting with it? Cool. Well, let's just dive right in then. A little bit about myself. I graduated from ISU. I've been doing web stuff for 7 years, Drupal for 4. There's a company in town called Web Filings that I've been working for 2 years in January. Balance scale media is nothing of super importance to note. It's just my side business. I'm sure all of you guys have side business, doing side work, and that's just what I house my side work underneath. And I love doing JavaScript stuff. One thing to note about this, I don't consider myself an expert, but I have a successful project launched and we're using at our company that is using Backbone, and so I just want to share my experience using Backbone thus far, and hopefully you guys can gain from that experience. Kind of asked the question already to you guys, who's using it? It seems like it's a pretty new thing, but there's some pretty big companies that have picked it up and have used it, and so it's a very flexible framework, as you guys will see, and we'll get into why that interest is there. To kind of summarize on the front end, all the stuff that we'll go through, I'll kind of run through what Backbone.js is and what it's not, some things that it's good at doing, and hopefully just sort of pick apart it and give you guys a good introduction to it, and you'll know kind of, hey, is there a project that this could really help me on? As well as there's a Backbone module for Drupal that I'll talk a little bit about, and some resources to help you get started. So usually for presentations I'd put my questions slide at the very end, but I like what Chris had to say this morning, and just making this more of a conversation as opposed to some teacher up front. So any questions that you guys have along the way, feel free to throw those out, and I'll do my best to answer those. So we'll start off by saying, try to define what Backbone.js is by first saying kind of what it isn't. When people say JavaScript framework or JavaScript library, you immediately think of things like jQuery and MooTools, things like that. And there's the JavaScript world is pretty dynamic, and so there's frameworks for tons of different things. And so we'll define what exactly Backbone is, but it's not. jQuery is mainly for doing some animations, doing manipulation of the DOM, and then there's lots of plugins that are built on top of jQuery, and so Backbone is none of that. In fact, you can use them side by side and leverage the strength of both of those frameworks. So what is Backbone? It's an MVC style framework. I say MVC style because I wouldn't say that it's true. If you've ever used MVC, for PHP or .NET, it's really just a way to separate your application structure. And so it follows those guidelines, but it follows them sort of loosely translated to JavaScript. So it uses REST and or local data storage for storing data and talking to the server. We'll get more into what data-driven UI changes mean later. It provides a way to organize your client-side code. If you guys have ever built like JS apps or just any application that's heavy on the front end with JavaScript, with just jQuery, things can get really messy really fast, and having all these event bindings and all these, so it helps you kind of organize that. Client-side templating and the production, the minified copy of it is pretty small. So So what are the components, main components of Backbone? The model view, collection and view, and the router. So model is pretty simple. If we're thinking in terms of Drupal, we're talking about a node basically, a piece of some structure that's going to hold data. Collection is just going to be a group of those things, and the view is what is going to determine how that's displayed to the user. The router is, you can think of it as like a hook menu in Drupal, where you're basically saying this URL is going to call this PHP function and it's going to do something. A router for Backbone is going to respond to a hashtag in the URL. So one thing that's part of the allure of Backbone is that your page transitions are all client-side. So you're not going to run back to the server for every single request. You're going to see changes to the UI that are all going to happen client-side. So this is really helpful actually in the mobile space because you're going to create very, very fast user experiences. So looking a little bit into how code's structured. So if I think, back a couple years doing just straight up jQuery applications, I would just start off, with some sort of object that I would use as my namespace and just start dumping code into it. Maybe you take an object-oriented approach and break out objects and do that sort of thing. But what would usually happen with me is I would have some sort of main application file that would have just all my core stuff in it. It would get pretty messy, especially with event handlers. And another thing too is just tying to, you often, when you write your selectors in jQuery, you're tying to these really specific, IDs and classes within the app. That it creates a lot of coupling between the HTML and the app itself. So how Backbone kind of helps smooth out some of those problems is that you're going to start using this model view and controller structure that's going to help kind of ease the pains of JavaScript. You can think of it how in the same way when you're doing HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you want to separate your structure from your functionality, from your design. It's the same sort of concept for MVC. You want to separate your data from the business logic that's going to happen to that data to how that data is displayed. So I'll show you some code examples later of what that looks like, but we'll keep trucking on here. Do you guys have any questions so far about Backbone? This is just sort of the nitty-gritty details of the framework itself. Anything? I will keep on trucking that. So what is data-driven UI? Basically, Backbone has the model and collection, the groups of models, sitting on the client side. And whenever there's a change to this data, it's going to fire an event. Your views can be set up to listen to any one of those events or ignore those events. Just depends on what you're building. But you could potentially have several views that listen to the changes of like one collection. So one thing gets added to your collection. Say it's say you have a site about cats, and somebody adds a new cat, and that data change event's going to happen to that collection. And if there's, say, 3 views listening to that collection, all of them are going to get re-rendered based on that new data change. So you can kind of see it's a powerful mechanism for how your page redraws itself. So here's just sort of like one of the things you're going to see with these slides is I'm not a graphic designer at all. So you'll see lots of boxes, lots of cylinders, and that's about it. Maybe some arrows. So data change happens. This fires an event. Obviously these two, view 1, view 4, would be listening to that event, and they would be re-rendered like immediately on the page. And keep in mind that when this data change event happens, whether it be from a user event it's not going to go back to the server and grab new data. All of its data should be in the collections on the client, and they would just be re-rendered. So you can see how the user experience is going to be really, really fast. A couple examples are this to-do list application. So get this out of the way. So if you guys have looked at JS frameworks, this to-dos app kind of gets thrown around a lot, and it's just a way to introduce people to different frameworks, and they'll just rewrite the same application in that framework, so you can kind of compare how they work. But I don't even know if we have a connection here. We do. So I just added several elements. It updated the collections, and those collections re-rendered their views. And you can see all this is happening on the client, so it's very, very fast. You can control as the developer, whether that pushes back to the server immediately and all that stuff if you want to. But there's also a sync method within Backbone where you can set to like an interval where it periodically syncs that data back to the server if you want to do that. So we'll go back to our slides here. Is this where it was? I don't think so. This is the well, if I had connection here. Here's the annotated source. So here's a little bit of source code for Backbone, what it looks like. And I think this is well, it's not too helpful to look at the library itself. I want to look at some usage. This would be more helpful. So let's just take a look at simple stuff here. Like here's what a model looks like. We're just extending Backbone model, and then typically, I mean, for most models, you don't even have to add any. Like here, they're adding a custom function, this prompt color function. For most models, you don't really need to add too much to it. A collection is just going to take a model as its base, and then from there you can start creating lists of data. And let's look at quick what a view looks like here. So here's the exciting part. Here's where we get to render our data. And this is the cool, for me when I saw this right here. This was super exciting for me. Because I think about how I did jQuery apps in the past, and you have all of this selector.click, selector.handling all of these events, and you get this huge pile of event handlers that load and hook up to your UI when the page loads. And seeing this sort of abstraction of that is really, really cool. Also, your views, I had that slide up earlier where a page could be made up of several different views in different areas of the page. These events should be centric to that view. So any HTML that you render with your render function, those event handlers will be applied and attached to that. And you don't have to write any of those the functions. So the way that you read this basically is when a click event happens on any element that has a class of icon, then run the open function. So any click event that happens on an element that has both the class and the edit, or both the button and the edit class, then run the open edit dialog. So if you guys have written this stuff, with raw jQuery or native JavaScript, you can see, wow, that saves a lot of lines of code. So client-side templating. So Backbone is, you can call it agnostic to which client-side templating system that you use. Like I was saying, within JavaScript, there's tons of different frameworks that do tons of different things. Backbone in and of itself is not a client-side templating framework. You can use whatever framework that you'd like. It does require _JS, which can handle templating if you like, but it's easy to swap out any of these. Dust.js, Handlebars, Mustache, Jade. There's tons of different ones. And actually, if you're interested in this, there's a LinkedIn blog post where they did sort of an analysis amongst their web dev team on the pros and cons of using several of these. And I think they ended up going with Dust.js. But these frameworks basically just handle basically taking HTML, static HTML pages that have these little nested variables, and then using JavaScript to say, here's a JSON object, here's a template, let's combine them, and here's your output. So the reason that people are doing this, again, I was saying it's really appealing in the mobile space to do this because it's ended up being very, very fast. And that's surprising to me because when I first started kind of digging into JavaScript, and I remember reading, you shouldn't do all this rendering with JavaScript. Why are you doing this? You should let the server take care of that because you're putting too much weight on the client. Well, that's all changed because more and more, companies like Google are building these web applications that really need tons of JavaScript power, and so that caused them to kind of reevaluate how fast their compilers were running. And of course, Chrome came onto the scene. It really wasn't. It's a really pretty new browser, but V8 is the rendering engine or the JavaScript runtime engine for Chrome. And they put a lot of engineering dollars into that, and it's extremely fast. And a lot of browsers are still trying to catch up with the speed of that. But the cool thing that's produced is client-side templating is worth doing. It's ended up being very, very fast because of that. And to me, that really it speaks to how fast web technology is moving. But it's really cool to see some of that stuff happen. It's anyways, that's enough about that. So here I'm just kind of putting into code what I just said. This is what it looks like for _JS. So here's just a simple JSON object. It just has a single item in it. You run the template function on your template, which here we're just using an inline string as our template. This could be a separate HTML file that you pull in. Some people use micro templates, which are basically script tags within the page that have HTML in them, and then they have some ID that they use to grab that HTML and then parse it. So what it looks like for underscore is we're using this template function, and we're saying model generate the JSON for this model, which is just a string, combine them together, and then we get our output. So for Backbone views, this is always going to be how it happens. Take the model, take the collection, generate the JSON, combine it with the template, and then output it. It's just a framework that kind of is data driven to generate that stuff. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the cool thing about this is everything is happening client side, so it's very, very fast. The specific way that I've used this at our company is that we have created a mobile site for that's sort of like a subset of intranet for our company, and we're using Node.js and on the server, Backbone on the client, and so all the Node.js server needs to do is implement these REST calls so that Backbone can request the data, and then as soon as the user has that page loaded to their phone, the entire experience is client-side. So for them, it's very, very fast. They're able to access data very quickly, And that's been a huge win. I can definitely see us using Backbone more for other projects that we do. And I already mentioned that earlier, how it is entirely client-side. So a little bit of breakdown on what this means for your server. Because for me, working with Drupal and getting used to, every page request, we're going back to the server, we're getting rendered HTML from PHP. Working with REST instead of that causes you to think about things a little bit differently. So what exactly does that mean? So a lot of times they call this implementation CRUD. You look at those first letters going down top to bottom. It just stands for create, read, update, delete. A lot of frameworks implement this for you, and I believe that Drupal's services module handles this for you as well. So if you use services on Drupal 7, then you would be able to implement the backbone or the back end for Backbone and you'd need to do this for each node. So each node would have this sort of REST setup so that the Backbone could go and grab that data, build the collections, and render your page. All right. So any questions about Backbone so far?
So what data, so you make, okay, so on my phone I type in whatever address that's going to pull up this app.
Mm-hmm.
What does it send me? Is it just sending me like a giant JSON object and some JavaScript that is the Backbone app
mm-hmm.
that knows how to go through that? Is it?
So for every collection you can either bootstrap it with data, which that means on the server side you say render this JSON object as a string to the page, and then reference it as a variable later and hook that up to your collection. Or you can specify what's called just a URL property in both your model and your collection, and that just tells Backbone, hey, when I need to get new data, this is where I need to go on the server to get it.
Okay.
So you could, if you didn't bootstrap any data, then on page load, for every collection, it would go and get data.
Sure.
So when you're architecting apps that are going to use Backbone, you want to be mindful of, how much data that you're talking about.
Right.
So if you're going to load like millions of records, then that's obviously not going to work.
Yeah.
You need to you either use a subset of that data and then start to pull it piece by piece, or so for the app that I wrote, we need to be able to look at our existing customers, and that's a pretty long list. And so I don't want to bootstrap that to the page, and I don't want a collection to pull all that data in on page load either. So instead, I just have like a RESTful search endpoint on the server that I can start typing in keywords, and then it'll start pulling in data like 30 records at a time or something. So it's really fast. It's really fast for Backbone to render, and I'm not dealing with a huge amount of records. So.
And you're specifying that in the URL property of the model and the collection? Or did I say that? Or is it model and view?
So if you're going to do it like that for search, then you don't want it to be a part of a collection. On page load, that is. So what I do is I have a form that they're going to type into,
right.
And it's going to start doing, I don't even have a submit button. Like as soon as they start typing, I say once you get to 3 characters, then start requesting from the server on a certain interval. And then when that data comes back from the server, I create a collection on the fly and then render from that collection.
So so Backbone, I assume, I guess, has what would be like the equivalent of the Ajax handler for the response?
Nope, you're leveraging, well, no, take that back. Backbone does have built-in Ajax requests. that you're doing to get the data from the server. But you can also leverage jQuery as well.
Sure.
Cool. Any other questions?
So just to clarify the create, read, update, delete, I haven't looked into REST a lot. Are you actually, like, when you're sending a request for create, it is a post request, it is a get request for read and put and delete and so on?
Mm-hmm.
The exact type of request.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's a lot of frameworks that just generate this sort of thing for you. Like Ruby on Rails will do it for you. Drupal's services module, I think, does it. I used Express framework for Node.js, which is sort of similar to like a PHP micro framework. If you've ever looked at, there's an explosion of like PHP micro frameworks, but simple PHP, you know, where you just see they look like just the Drupal hook menu is what they look like. So cool things that have kind of made me think about web development differently and working with Backbone and thinking about Drupal. Like I was saying, you traditionally you get used to like doing a page request every time, and then having Drupal generate this HTML and it renders to the page. Backbone kind of it disrupts how I think about web apps because that's not happening every page transition. That's all happening on the client, and so it forces me to stop thinking about my server as just something that generates HTML, and I start thinking about service-oriented architecture, which is very, very powerful because that means we can put any client that we want in front of our data source. It could be an Android application, it could be a TV, it could be iPhone, iPod app. We could share that data with another site. All of a sudden, when we have these APIs implemented, our data is super accessible to other services. And because the company that I work for is cloud-based, that's really, really valuable to us too. So, and I think, I went to DrupalCorn Denver, and there was a lot of this talk about Drupal 8 and focusing a lot on services, and there was sort of this acknowledgement that, yeah, Drupal sort of biases HTML as its delivery medium, and it shouldn't. We should be able to deliver XML and JSON and just as well as we deliver HTML. So I felt like working with Backbone and thinking about web apps in that way really reinforced the direction that was presented at DrupalCon about Drupal 8. Another cool thing is that I was thinking about what Chris said this morning, and yeah, for designers, it's really challenging sometimes to work with Drupal and learning, what's in template.php, what template files do I need to copy, and then when I copy them, there's this alien PHP code in there. When you're working with Backbone, you're just going to be working with HTML files, basically, and you're going to have, these little variables that are going to be really obvious if you're comfortable with HTML. That you just know, hey, I don't touch that variable. I know something's going to print there, and it's very straightforward for them. So that's some cool stuff that came out of that. Real quickly, I want to look at this the Backbone module. So what I want you to see is that part of the page. Not so much this part of the page or that part of the page. I would keep an eye on this module. What's really cool about this is that they write sort of a little wrapper code around the Backbone framework for mapping Drupal views to collections. And you can see in this example code that they create a collection based on their the wrapper code they're doing using Drupal namespace, and they're saying the view name is this. This is a view that exists on the server. Go fetch it. So go get the data, return it to the client, get the first record in that list of things, however it's sorted, and set the title on it, and then save it. And what Backbone's going to do is it's going to push that change to the server, and you just updated a node. So I think that's pretty slick. Personally, for the project that I was working on, I didn't really need this. I initially kind of jumped into it and started to try to implement it. And what I didn't like about it was that all this wrapper code that they were putting around Backbone really made Backbone, I think, a little bit more cumbersome than it needed to be. So that's okay. Another way that you could go about implementing Backbone for Drupal is just to write a custom module and say, for home, /home or /Backbone or whatever I want to use to kick out my my Backbone app, just load it from HTML there. So load my Backbone framework, jQuery, whatever initial page elements are there, and then bam, you're off and ready to go. So that's the route that I took, was sort of just implementing my own. And it's as simple as just writing a hook menu. So. Services module was something I mentioned. Unfortunately, I don't have a connection in here. Sorry about that. But this is a very, very, very popular module for 7. I think it's a lot more robust in 7 than it is in 6. And it's come a long way. I remember looking at it in 6 and looking at like the deploy module that was built on top of that for deploying nodes and views from one server to another. But definitely check that out. Like I was saying, the whole CRUD REST setup, I think, is handled out of box by that. So yeah, check out this line. Client-side templates replace the theme system almost entirely. So that's that's sort of a I don't know. So I think people have mixed feelings about that. Sometimes it's like, hey, if we're going to go Drupal, then let's go all Drupal. Like, why are we dropping this piece of it? But it just depends on what you're building. And I think as web developers, we mature to a point where we're just looking at the tools that we have, and we're saying which tool makes the most sense for the project that I'm building. So it may make sense to use client-side templating. It may not. That's for you to weigh out. And I have used it in a specific case of a mobile web app, and it was really, really beneficial. We're actually building a Drupal 7 mobile site right now at the same time, and it just does not perform as fast as the Backbone app. So here's some resources that you can use to kind of get familiar with Backbone. And I have not been watching the time at all. But actually, we're pretty close. Backbone.js is just the home site where you'll find the code and everything. There's an open source book on GitHub that is pretty short and is helpful to read. So check that out. Backbone tutorials, I just found this site like this week and has some really good stuff. So look at that. Has anybody ever used Peep Code before? Is anybody familiar with it? Of course. Chris has checked it out. I love Peep Code. I love Build a Module, obviously. Drupalize me. These guys definitely take you in depth as far as the subject matter of their videos. They have one specifically on Backbone that you can buy. It's a paid service. So unfortunately, this isn't like a cool open source honest effort to educate people. They are making money off of it, but I think that the content is worth it. The one on Backbone, I would. For me, it's like I could sit down and try to find time within a 2-week span to read this, 500-page book because I don't read very fast. Or I can sit down for an hour and watch this Peep Code screencast and learn the same amount. So the whole idea is that for Peep Code is they give these developers, real developers, say, hey, go build this project, and then obviously make sure it works and it's awesome, and then come back and walk people through, what were the pitfalls, what were the things that you figured out, show us how it works, and so it's really done really well. So check those out. And then this last blog post was something I used this week, actually. So that's really only of interest if you're going to be developing Backbone. It manages, or it addresses like a really specific, just how you're handling rendering your pages for Backbone. So that is really all I have for this. But you guys have any more questions about Backbone?
I'm primarily a designer and themer, but what are the implications in replacing the Drupal theming system for like caching and compression? Have you done any server load testing? Are you sending more data out overall, less? How does it play out?
So it's really difficult. You can't just run an A/B test like you do against Drupal on a Backbone app, because all it's going to do is serve the bootstrap over and over again. It's not going to take into account that your page transitions are going to be all client-side and super fast with these sporadic, runs to the server to get little bits of data. So it's really hard to measure that. So I don't know what to tell you. But what I can tell you is that obviously the bootstrap is going to be compressed and gzipped and all that. That's all on your end as far as making sure you have a clean deployed site. But because you're rendering on the client side, again, it's going to be really, really fast. There's no latency. You're not waiting for anything. You're just rendering. The browser to browser, though, I would say, because every browser has a different runtime engine for JavaScript, you're going to see varying speeds that will be, I don't know how noticeable they'll be, but I know, Firefox. Like, I loved Firefox, but I can't get over how much faster Chrome is because of V8, and I can develop much faster with that. So.
Actually beat V8.
Really?
I think so.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'll definitely be checking that out. So, cool. I'm going to take a break, and I will be in the same room for Node.js followed up. So.